worried. So, this has been going on for a long time. Progressive education it's not a new event. It's been going on for years and years and years. One of the first people who actually put out there the progressive philosophy for education is Karl Marx. And his big thing is that if you get control of the schools, you control the children. And if you get control of the children, you control the state. So that's the whole purpose behind the progressive education and progressive education reform. Another person who might be a little bit of a surprise to you is John Dewey. Yes, John Dewey is the guy who came up with the Dewey Decimal System. But John Dewey was an avowed socialist. He himself would tell you that he is a socialist and believes in doing things for the greater good. He is the father of, or considered the father of progressive education, where it is child-centered and reconstructionist. In other words, you're doing more of a what the child wants to learn rather than what the child needs to learn. So he was a big player in that. Then we kind of skip forward a little bit, and that, by the way, was in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Out of that came what was called the Progressive Education Association. And their goal, and they were around from 1919 and 1955, and their goal was to completely reform the American education system. So, it's been going on. From there, we jump to 1965 in LBJ. LBJ came up with his War on Poverty, but he also came up with the first federalized program for funding education. And the sole purpose there is if you give money to the states, then the states are going to do exactly what you want them to do when it comes to education. So we get into this movement now of getting to overcoming poverty by making sure that we educate our kids. Well, the problem is that that's not what's necessarily going to overcome the poverty. It's making sure that we have a cohesive family. And his War on Poverty, one of the things that it did was to tear down the family. Because in order to get welfare, you could only be a single-parent home, so the father was removed from the household and moved away. And it's been shown that single-parent homes, the children that come out of them don't necessarily succeed as well as the kids that come out of cohesive families. 1990, we have the World Declaration on Education, and that came out of the UN. And that was signed by George H.W. Bush, and that came forward with UNESCO goals. There were 8 goals. I could go into them, but I won't, but you can go out there and look at them. But it's basically, again, working for the common good. Then you get into the Clinton years, and you have a gentleman by the name of Mark Tucker. Mark Tucker gets very involved in education, even though he is not credentialed in education. He has no degree in education whatsoever, but he seems to think that he knows what the best thing is to do for our kids and American education. He writes a letter, his Dear Hillary letter, that explains that he wants to train children in specific jobs so they can serve the workforce and the global economy instead of educating them so they can make their own decisions on the career paths that they want to take. You get the UNESCO goals, you get the Dear Hillary letter, and out of that comes 3 critical pieces of legislation in 1960, that was in 1995. These are, or 1994, I'm sorry. These are the Goals 2000, the School to Work Act, and then also the reauthorization of LBJ's Elementary and Secondary Education Act. What these do were to bypass school boards and the state legislatures. The federal money came directly into the governor and the governor's appointees, and then they made the decision on how they were going to disperse that money and build up for the workforce development boards. You also had the database system that came out of this, and that information was used for the labor market systems and was actually turned over to the Department of Labor. Things like info about the child and their family, their ID number, their Social Security number was their ID number, and the data was then made available to the government and future employers. And then you also had your national standards and national testing. So that's where it first came through for the big-time national control over our education. Also in 1994, you have an organization that comes to being, which is called Achieve, Inc. Now, Achieve, Inc. will come back into this picture again with Common Core, but they were formed by governors and corporate leaders at an education summit in New York, and that was in collaboration with Mark Tucker. What they did was they benchmarked standards and assessments, and they did that in order to force conformity with the Goals 2000. So you had legislation that was passed, Goals 2000, but it wasn't being complied with, so what they did was they came forward with this and did these benchmarkings, which then forced the teachers to start complying with Goals 2000. Later on, like I said, they get involved with Common Core. In 2008 is when they actually start working on the Common Core standards. 1995 was an experiment that actually failed, and it was when the national history standards were put out there, but they were so anti-American, so politically correct, that they were abandoned in a hurry. They were actually, there was a Senate Resolution 66 that was passed 99-1 to do away with those history standards. But what they did with this, and by the way, that one person supposedly, and I don't know, I have this secondhand, but that one senator was from Louisiana, and he didn't think that the resolution went far enough. He thought it needed to be a little more strict, so he actually voted against it. So, but it was still an event to where those that are in the progressive education reform movement figured out that they needed to change the way they approached the public. And what they learned to do was, if you're going to implement a national curriculum, as the national history standards did, that you need to do it quickly, quietly, you need to do it without any oversight from the legislature, and that you need to start with something that is not controversial. So go with a subject matter that's pretty cut and dried. They take this thought process well through all of this and into Common Core. Then you have Clinton in 2000, who signs the Dakar framework, and that's an updated UNESCO goal system. And after that, you have George W. Bush in 2001 sign the No Child Left Behind legislation. Now, the problem with No Child Left Behind is, number one, it continues the Clinton and Tucker education transformation, but it was a mandate without any funding. Our daughter is a teacher in Georgia, and that was her biggest complaint about No Child Left Behind was, Mom, we're given all these requirements that we have to live up to, but our school's not provided any funding to put these requirements into place. It's being left up to the school districts and the taxpayers to take care of it. What No Child Left Behind did was it actually embraced the UNESCO Education for All. And it went further to tie the adequate yearly progress, or the AYP, to the Title I money. So in other words, they have the AYP, which is the grading system for the schools, and it's this convoluted process that they go through and they determine whether your school is actually a failing or a passing school. Well, if you're a failing school and you continue to be a failing school, they're going to cut off your Title I money. So we come around to Race to the Top in 2009. Race to the Top came about with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And in that act, they were given money and told to just spend it how they needed to spend it. What they did was they said, we need a robust data system, we need teacher evaluations, we need common standards, we need international benchmarks, new tests, we need to redesign failing schools, and by the way, in the process of giving you all this money out there, there's strings attached to it. So you want the Race to the Top money, you've got to implement Common Core standards. Conservative position on all this, on Race to the Top, and I'm sure that all of you are right in line with this, is that nationalizing curriculum is illegal. It violates state sovereignty, and it also opposes any of the tenets of a constitutional republic. Our Constitution says that control of education remains with the states. It is not a federal job to take care of our education of our children. So that's number one about Race to the Top, and any of the previous programs that attempted to nationalize education here in the U.S. Also, our federal spending on education is 16% of our budget. And that compares to health care, which is 18%, defense, which is 16%, pensions, which are 16%. Those are the only ones that they spend, our government spends more on than education. So our education has enough money thrown at it. There's no question about that. And also there's no correlation anywhere between the amount of money spent on education and successful education results. And the bottom line is Race to the Top is outcome-based education, and it has failed numerous times in numerous countries, and as a matter of fact, it's actually outlawed in Australia. So that's kind of a real quick history to bring you up to where we are today. That's how we have progressed from the 1800s all the way up to Race to the Top and Common Core standards. So who are the players that we have today? What do we have in our progressive education reform today? We have a gentleman by the name of Arne Duncan. He's our Secretary of Education. He has said that education is a civil rights issue of our generation and is the only path from poverty and the only way to achieve equal and just society. He believes in social justice, in teaching social justice and not teaching academics. And at a governor's education symposium where he spoke, he says, we are now in a perfect storm for reform. We also have a lady by the name of Linda Darling Hammond. Now, Linda Darling Hammond happens to be Obama's education transition team leader. She also wrote C-Scope for Texas. Now, Texas said, no way, I don't want Common Core. Don't want it here, take it elsewhere. We're going to manage our own education system here. Well, you had a corporation that came in and kind of sold this education curriculum process through the back door, and they ended up with C-Scope. I believe it was last week, Texas has voted that C-Scope is no longer to be taught in Texas. They're done. It's gone. With Linda Darling Hammond, her thing is that she wants assessments to shift from seat-based learning to competency-based learning. And she's not concerned with your cognitive skills. Or with you. So her thing is, let's look at non-cognitive skills. Let's look at how you're doing as far as competency in doing a job, a chore, a task, something to that effect, but not necessarily what you're learning. And then one of our favorites, who's in the education system, is Bill Ayers. Bill Ayers obviously started a lot earlier in his Weather Underground, but in 1980s to the present, he's been involved in our education system here in the United States and elsewhere, by the way. His connections are with Arne Duncan, Darling Hammond, and Obama. He was a keynote speaker at a DC education conference in 1990. I don't know what his business there is. He's spoken 4 times in Venezuela, and he has said there that education is the motor force for revolution. He has spoken just this year to the Association of Teacher Educators in San Francisco and the American Educational Research Association in April of this year. Another player today that we have who's big time in Common Core is Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation. They have put tons of money into Common Core. He has already given $1 million to the National PTA, and that was to fund think tanks that favor Common Core. He has given almost $1 million, $959,000, to the Fordham Institute for advancing educational excellence. And something that we need to be concerned about right here in Florida is that he has given $1 million to Jeb Bush and his Foundation for Educational Excellence. He has a program right now that he's implementing to where he is providing grants to teachers. And it's called Shifting into High Gear, Accelerating Common Core Through Teachers Networks. And those grants are anywhere from $100,000 to $250,000. So if you're a teacher and you can apply to Bill Gates and get $100,000, so you can implement Common Core, hey, why not? You know, let's go out and get that money and tear up our education system. Problem is that the Gates Foundation agenda has become the country's agenda in education. So Arne Duncan may be our Secretary of Education. Bill Gates is who is driving what is going on in our education systems here in the United States right now. So, what are Common Core standards? Where did they start? What's going on with them? 2009, Achieve Inc., that group I talked to you about just a few minutes ago, they partnered with the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices. Now, that is not our nation's governors getting together. This is a trade association. Not all of the governors across the United States are members of this group. And they also partnered with the Council of Chief State School Officers, and those are school superintendents across our country. The reason they did this was, remember I told you what you have to do to get reform put into place? You have to do it quickly, quietly. You have to do it without legislative oversight. You've got to make it not national. You've got to make it from the state. Well, they partnered with these two groups because they knew that if they put out Common Core, it wasn't going anywhere. But if they could get these state organizations, or what appear to be state organizations, to actually be the ones to put it out there, then it would be more readily accepted. So they pushed to have the Common Core standards released as a state initiative. Again, 2009, we had the stimulus money that was out there. There was $4.35 billion earmarked in the stimulus money for education, and it was handed to Arne Duncan and said, you go spend it however you want to spend it. Doesn't matter. We don't care. No oversight of it. Just take it. Go do it. So what does he do? He establishes a system to force competition between the states, and that was the race to the top. The states had to compete for those race to the top grants. They weren't just automatically presented to the states. So they had to fill out the race to the top application. By the way, that application came out in November of 2009. Applications had to be in no later than the end of January 2010. Had 2 months to complete those applications. So again, quickly, quietly, let's get this done without any legislative oversight. So they're pushing the race to the top out there in a hurry. Again, in order to get race to the top grant money, you had to agree. It was an absolute must that you had to agree to implement and adopt Common Core standards, and these were not written, either the standards or the assessments. None of it was written, so it was all handed to them. Trust me, sight unseen, it's going to be okay. We don't have a problem. You guys are going to like it. It's all going to be good. So let's go that route. They presented the race to the top, and we had 45 states plus the District of Columbia who got race to the top money and said that they would adopt and implement Common Core standards. The problem is they're now finding out the Common Core isn't all what it was presented to be. And so just to give you an idea of what they were presented as far as what Common Core standards, what it was going to do, they were to provide a consistent, clear understanding of what students are expected to learn so teachers and parents know what they need to do to help them. The standards are designed to be robust and relevant to the real world, reflecting the knowledge and skills of our young people, skills that our young people need for success in college and careers. With American students fully prepared for the future, our communities will be best positioned to compete successfully in the global economy. That is the mission statement of Common Core standards. The standards are research and evidence-based. This is what they're telling us. They're aligned with college and work expectations. They're rigorous, and they're internationally benchmarked. They're not. They are. None of this is actually true about any of it. In order for a particular standard to be included, it could only be done so when the best available evidence indicated that its mastery was essential for college and career readiness in the 21st century and to be globally competitive society. They also said that the Common Core standards were not a stagnant set of standards, that this is to be a living, breathing document. It's a living work, okay? So as we progress into this and we find that they need to be changed, there's better evidence that something in it isn't going quite well, then, we'll tweak it. We'll get it better. It'll be okay. Trust us. It's all right. So with the Common Core standards, this is what our states were told. And of course, people are going to come up to this, they're going to hear all this and they're going to go, yeah, we need to compete in the global economy. We need to be a global society. We need to be ready, our children need to be educated and prepared to be out there and be successful. Well, one gentleman who was responsible for writing one of the math standards, actually said that being prepared for college is not being prepared for the great big university / 4-year college. It's to be prepared for that little community college. That's all we're really, that's our goal. It's down here. It's not up here. We're going to get you prepared for that little community college. So how do they proceed then with Common Core and getting the states up to speed and get this thing ready to roll out? Well, they formed two consortia. These were for the states to join. The states could look at what the two consortia were going to do, and they could choose which of the two they wanted to be involved with. They actually have two different tests that they're coming up with, two different assessments that they're coming up with. The first one is the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers, or PARC, and that is the one that Florida is a member. The other one is a Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. They refer to it just as SMARTER. And like I said, they are developing two different styles of assessment. They are going to develop assessments that provide accurate information about what students know and can do and measure student achievement against standards designed to ensure that all students gain the knowledge and skills needed to succeed in college and the workplace. And those tests that they're developing, those assessments they're developing, are going to be available in the 2014-2015 school year. So we're already in this since what, 09? And trust us, it's all going to be okay. But the assessments are not going to be ready until 2014-2015. There is federal involvement in these two consortia. They have funded them with a total of $330 million in grants. And they have done this because they feel that you need to coordinate individual statewide assessments to create a more desirable assessment and also create valid comparisons of scores among states. So see, this is one of the tools that they're using to sell Common Core, especially to your teachers and to your administrators, is that, you know, kids move. They move across state lines. And we need to be able to, if they move from this point, they need to be able to pick up what they're learning here over here and not be behind so that, you know, that they don't lose out. Well, you know, it's not everybody, number one, learns at the same level, but it's kind of a falsehood in that not that many kids pick up and move from here and cross state lines and go over there. And each state already has their own assessment system. They already have their statewide assessment system. If you move within a state, you're going to pretty much be close to target. You know, you may not be exactly in the same place, but you're going to be pretty close to target when you move within a state. But I'm told that it's 2% or less of the entire U.S. population that actually crosses state lines that we need to worry about picking up from here. Now, military, obviously, that's an issue. When you've got a child that's gone to 5 different high schools within a 3-year period, you know, that can be an issue. But I also, having been a brat, I was a Navy brat, and also having a daughter who went to 2 different high schools, it's not a terrible transition. You can actually, you know, military are more adjusted to it and can easily approach it. So the issue of picking up and having this nationwide system, curriculum, so that you're not losing out when you move, I don't think it's such a, you know, a big issue, and we don't need to worry about it. The 2 areas that they've picked on to start with the Common Core standards, again, do something that's non-controversial. One is mathematics, and the other one is the English language arts, and they actually have a different title for it, and I'll get into that. But Common Core state standards for mathematics. They have taken algebra and moved it from the 8th grade to the 9th grade. So kids are not going to be exposed to algebra until they're in high school, or last year of a middle school if you're in a school district that actually has high school as sophomore through senior years. Geometry. Geometry is going to be taught by an experimental method that has never been used anywhere in the world successfully. It was actually developed by a Soviet mathematician. He said, I've got to come up with a better way to teach, my students so that they get it, so they get what it is I'm trying to teach them. So he came up with this convoluted process to teach geometry. The prodigies, now he's teaching mathematical prodigies. They didn't get it. So they abandoned it. He said, okay, it's not working. So let's just do away with it. We'll set it aside. Well, guess what Common Core Standards is putting into effect? Common Core Standards geometry is the Soviet-developed geometry that was abandoned because the prodigies couldn't get it. So how are our kids going to get it? And then you have the fuzzy math, which you've all heard about, except now we have fuzzy math on steroids. And I can go into, and I didn't present my slides up on there because they're pretty wordy, and like I said, this is the first time I've given this, but I can show you afterwards an example of some of the math that our kids are learning, how they are going about multiplying something very, very simple, like 21 times 36. It's a process this long. We don't use the same mnemonics that we used when we learned mathematics. So, there are 2 math textbooks that are out there that are being used right now. If your children or grandchildren have these textbooks, I'd highly recommend that you get with their math teacher and see what you can do to get them a different math book, because they're not teaching them the standard math. The one is called TERC, T-E-R-C, Investigations, and the other one is called Everyday Math. Those two, if your children or grandchildren are studying math from either of those two, I highly recommend that you see what you can do to remedy that. The Singapore math textbooks, yeah, I'm going to say this, are probably the best ones that you can find out there. You can get them online. They're reasonably priced, and they are very good for home tutoring. But what you have is we're doing away with the Saxon-based math, the math that we all learned, that's been highly successful. I mean, we can probably do addition, subtraction, some multiplication, and some division in our heads, right? Without much trouble. That's highly successful, but now we're going to the fuzzy math, which has proven to fail time and time again. Dr. James Milgram, he's a PhD and emeritus professor at Stanford, was the only mathematician on the Common Core Validation Committee, the math validation committee. He says actually that our students will actually be 2 or more years behind international expectations by 8th grade and only fall further behind as they talk about grades 8 through 12. And he said this in his testimony to the Indiana Senate Education Committee. He says the common standards as they're being put into place, our kids will not achieve calculus in high school. There's no way. And he refused to sign off on the Common Core Standards. He walked away from it, said, you're crazy. And he actually said, it's almost a joke to think students who master the Common Standards would be ready for math at a university. So this is where we're headed. Then you have the English language arts and literacy in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects. So this isn't just your English lit classes, okay, guys? These are readings that'll be done across the board. You're talking history, social studies, science, and technical courses. In reading, grade 4, 50% of their reading will be done in what's called literacy, and 50% of their reading will be done in what's called information. Now, let me tell you the difference. Literacy is what we all read. You know, nice little books, stories about, you know, Heidi or you know, age-appropriate stories as you're going through. You're going to read the classics, right? Well, that's what literacy is. Then you have the information. That's where the problem is. Information reading is reading manuals, executive orders, court cases, schematics, anything that is of an informational nature. So you want to learn how to read? We're going to teach you with this dull, dry, boring information manual instead of getting you to read with something that's interesting, fun, you want to learn how to read. And so they're actually discouraging a love of reading in the process. And so you're starting with this up to the 4th grade. By the 4th grade, they're going to be doing 50% in literacy and 50% 4th grade in information. Then you've got grade 8, 45% in literacy, 55% in information. Guess what it is in high school, guys? You've got, exactly, 30% literacy, 70% in informational. So it does greatly diminish the amount of classic literature that our children are going to be reading. And the reason why they're doing it is on the job, you're not reading those classics. You're reading manuals. And if we teach you how to read manuals or teach you how to read you know, an executive order or whatever, you're going to be better suited in the workplace than you are if you just know how to read. Okay? You know, the idea is if you learn how to read, doing fun things and understanding it and grabbing the concept, you're going to be able to read this stuff when you're on the workplace. You don't need to worry about being trained to do it in high school. What we've gotten back to in all of this is the old 90s school-to-work mentality, and all it does is spit out workers for the economic machine, which is built by those really smart people in D.C. Also in your English language arts, no phonics, no spelling, no spelling. My neighbor came to me, and my car's parked out there. You can all see it. I got a great big stop Common Core in the back of my window. My neighbor came over, and she said, I have to talk to you. My little guy, he's in 1st grade, and I'm really worried because his math problems that he's bringing home are about zombies and aliens. And what was the other one? It was blood and... No, it wasn't blood and guts, but it was like that. But basically, in the math was to build this thing to where, you know, you build it and then the blood can run through it. And she said, we don't have cable TV. My kids don't know what a zombie is to start with. And they're teaching them math problems using the bus driver's an alien, the kids are zombies, and how many zombies are left on the bus after dropping off X number of zombies at the bus stops or whatever. You know, but they're not teaching phonics, they're teaching word recognition. But my question is, if you're not teaching spelling, how do you get to the word recognition? And that was one of the things that she confirmed with me because I had learned that they weren't doing the spelling anymore. And she said, my son brought one spelling list home at the beginning of the school year. He hasn't brought one home since because his teacher told us, oh, he doesn't need to worry about that. We're not teaching that anymore. So no spelling. So again, we're back to phonics being successful, not being taught, and whole word recognition is what's going to be taught, and it's been proven to fail. Sandra Stotsky, Professor Emerita of Education Reform at the University of Arkansas, was the top English language arts expert on the validation committee for these standards. She said, number one, the appendix that lists the titles of the so-called recommended readings, they're sorted by grade level and type, so stories, poetry, drama, informational text. They're intended to suggest a level of complexity for a particular grade level, but they're not intended to be a list of recommended or required titles for classroom study. So in other words, they're putting these out there and they're saying, you know, this is kind of what we recommend. You know, here they are, but it's really more of a match-up to grade level. So you can see, you know, they may not get into those executive orders that are signed by the president until they get into the 9th grade, but they're going to get that EPA manual at the at the 4th grade. You know, so you know, those are the things with that. And also, as I said, they're not for only for the reading and English teachers. They're across the board. I mean, look at the title of the standard. She, like Dr. I can't think of his name right now. Anyway, she refused to sign off on the standards. And here's what she said. Common Core's college readiness standards for English language arts are chiefly empty skill sets and cannot lead to even a meaningful high school diploma. She walked away from it, said you're crazy. The most chilling part of Common Core, I can probably deal with, they're not teaching spelling because I'll teach spelling at home. I can probably deal with, they're teaching fuzzy math, well, I'll teach the real math at home. But the one thing that I cannot deal with, and the most chilling aspect of Common Core, is what's called data mining. They are going to be collecting 400 data points on your child, grandchild, niece, nephew. That student that's sitting in that chair at that school is going to have 400 data points collected on them. Examples. Oh, and by the way, here is straight from the Department of Education. They are doing data mining because they need a predictive model that combines demographic data from an external student information system and learning behavior data from the student learning database to track a student's progress and make predictions about his or her future behaviors or performance, such as future course outcomes and dropouts. That's straight from the Department of Education. And as I said, 400 data points. Here they are, some examples. Academics, which you'd expect. Disciplinary issues, yeah. Blood type, birthmarks, career objectives, starting in kindergarten. Citizenship, base salary or wage, change in developmental status, community service hours, city of birth, birth weight, voting status, work type, health data, religious affiliation, and on and on. And I will tell you, it is not on just the student, it's on that student's family. They are getting every last ounce of information they can get from you through Obamacare, which I call CommieCare, through now our schools and our kids. They are building a massive database system that sits out in Utah, and that database system was built by the Gates Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, and Rupert Murdoch, funded by them, and they developed that database system, and it wasn't until just recently they turned that over to a nonprofit corporation called InBloom, which was established for the purpose of controlling the information. Here's an even more chilling aspect of it. Technology is going to be used to profile the child. DOE displayed photographs of actual technology that will be used on the students, not for the students, on the students. And this is what will be put in place if the department's plan is fully implemented. They're collecting 4 parallel streams of effective sensors to effectively measure the child. They'll take facial expressions from the facial expression camera, which is a device that can be used to detect emotion. They'll have posture analysis seats, pressure mouse, wireless skin conductive sensor, which is a band that goes around the wrist. And they're all designed to collect physiological response data from a biofeedback apparatus that measures blood volume, pulse, and galvanic skin response to examine a student's frustration. They are from day one when these things are put into effect, and guess what they are? They're iPads that Bill Gates is developing, so it all comes back to him and his operating system. They are doing psychological profiles on our children. That goes into their school records, that follows them from pre-K all the way to their job. It doesn't stop at college. It goes all the way and is handed off to their employer. Here's what's even more concerning. Our president gutted FERPA. FERPA is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. Before, what was in the students' school records could only be shared with a handful of need-to-know people. Guess what? It can be shared with any federal agency or private organization/corporation that they deem necessary without your approval. They will not run it past the parents. Their justification is so that they can audit or evaluate the education program. So here's the real Common Core. Written by special interests and federally funded nonprofits in secret. Pushed on states by federal government before they even saw the final product. It is not voluntary. If anybody tells you it is, tell them they're wrong. Requirements are vague, meaningless, and pathetically low quality. It is an unproven set of mandates and return to a failed philosophy. As I said, outcome-based education has been outlawed in Australia. They do data mining on teachers and students, plus their families. And they have central planning, which equals government control and ultimate failure. Here are problems with Common Core, if I haven't already identified them. It was implemented to bridge the achievement gap. But it does do that, or it will maybe do that, but the way it's going to do it is it's taken the top to the bottom, not the bottom to the top. So that gap's coming down instead of being lifted up. Our kids are being dumbed down even further and further. Creates a national mediocrity. If the curriculum isn't working, teacher or school can't change it. There's no one to take it to. And if you really want desperately to get it changed, you have to take it back to the consortia that you're a member of, and you have to get all of the states involved in that consortia to agree to the change. The assessment costs, those testing costs, right now, on average, it costs about $8 per student to test the student to see how they are progressing, how they're doing. With the new standards and assessments, it's upwards to $100 per student. You also have to worry about teacher professional development, especially with your English teachers. You're going to have new textbooks and instructional materials. And again, this is where Bill Gates gets back his money that he's putting into this. He's got his iPads that they're going to be using. Eventually, every student will have an iPad. That iPad has a little camera on it. They'll have all the little touchy-feely things that they need to do that psychological profile. And also his operating systems. It will impact homeschooling and private schools. Not a question about it. If you are homeschooling your children and you are not teaching them in the Common Core standard, they will never get into college. Because the ACT and SAT tests are being written to the Common Core standard. And if you don't have the thought process to go through their touchy-feely, emotion-based, how do you get from here to there questions, and you don't come up with their right answer, even though it is factually correct, but it's not their correct answer, you won't pass your ACTs and SATs, your kids won't, and they won't get into college. The other thing is you have a thing called Teach for America. This is funded by AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps is George Soros. Teach for America are non-certified teachers. They are kids that come out of college that have a degree. They go to a 5-week course, and then they are replacing a teacher that's certified, that's tested, that's evaluated, that knows how to teach your kids, and they're going in to just now become a classroom monitor. The other thing that they're doing is they're going in there and indoctrinating the kids, even more so than what they've been indoctrinated to this point. So what does adopting Common Core standards really mean? As I said, the U.S. Constitution reserves control of education to the states. So if you adopt Common Core as a state, you're abdicating your responsibility for educating your kids in your state to the federal government. Again, you can't change or delete anything in the standards/curriculum. They are there. You can add to it, but what you add to it will never be tested. So why teach anything that's not going to be tested? And that's where we're headed. As a state, terribly tough, almost impossible to leave Common Core standards once you've actually signed up to and adopted it, put it into place in your state. Requires written notice with statutory or policy reason for exit. The consortium of states must approve it, and a final approval from the U.S. Department of Education needs to be received. This is not a state initiative. This is nationalization of our education. Do not let anybody tell you differently. So who supports Common Core standards? Well, obviously PTA does, because they got $1 million from Bill Gates to go out there and do it. Chamber of Commerce does. Catholic Archdiocese do. So your Catholic schools are teaching Common Core standards. Teachers unions, the NEA and the AFT. Tony Bennett, our Commissioner of Education right over here in Tallahassee, who was fired from Indiana, by the way, and I'm a Hoosier. The position in Indiana is an elected position. Indiana is a conservative state. They have a Republican governor. They have a Republican legislature. They voted in a Democrat to be their Commissioner of Education because they would not re-elect Tony Bennett. And who do we end up with? Who's appointed? Appointed, not elected, appointed. We need to change that in Florida. We need to be electing our state school board and our state commissioner. Without a doubt, they need to be elected positions. We ended up with a guy who was fired from Indiana because he supports Common Core so strongly, and we've got him in Tallahassee. And you got Jeb Bush, who we have to deal with here in Florida, and Rick Scott. He supports Common Core education. All right, Common Core in Florida. We did receive $700 million Race to the Top monies. Our Constitution says, our Constitution, not the U.S. Constitution, our Constitution says the school board shall operate, control, and supervise all free public schools within the school district. Common Core standards came into this state without ever a day being seen by our legislature in Tallahassee. They're playing catch-up this last session. Playing catch-up. You talk to any of our legislators over in Tallahassee, because I was there, I did it, I went over and talked to them. Most of them will look at you with the deer in, the headlights look. What? What's Common Core? I don't know anything about it. Well, don't you think you should be learning about Common Core before you start passing bills that's going to put it into effect here in this state? So they're playing catch-up. What they did, Rick Scott brought in about a month ago 40 some school superintendents from across the state of Florida. And the reason why he had to do this was because they have to be the ones to implement Common Core. It can't be mandated down to them to implement it. They are the ones by our Constitution that says that they have to do it. So he brings them into Tallahassee and he sells them on Common Core. Okaloosa superintendent was there. Santa Rosa superintendent was there. Bay County. The majority of the ones that were over there were from the northern portion of the conservative portion of Florida. So they have all been now sold on the great goodness of Common Core. There were two bills. Oh, by the way, in March of 2011, Florida passed the Student Success Act, which mirrors the goals of the Race to the Top application that they filled out. So we have legislation that says we're going to comply with Race to the Top. Senate Bill 878, this last session, called Education Accountability. It was sponsored by Senator Galvano. He had no clue what he was sponsoring. Not a clue. Went and talked to him and told him exactly what he was signing up to, and he was like, I had no idea. He's a sponsor of a bill. And he said, I had no idea. It was very intrusive, would have connected those 400 data points with the federal government. Fortunately, even though it passed both chambers, it died in the conference committee. Thank the good Lord that this thing came to a death this session. It could have been ugly, ugly, ugly. Then we had Senate Bill 1630, which was just titled Education. It was tabled. However, the language in that requiring load testing and independent verification of charter schools was moved to another bill and was passed. We had asked that language requiring a short and long-term analysis of Common Core prior to implementation, we had asked that that be added to the bill. It did not get added, but the bill didn't go anywhere because the verbiage was taken out and put into another bill. But we do believe that we'll be successful next legislative session to get that language into a bill and get it passed. Timelines for Florida's implementation. We're already into it. 2012-2013, this school year. CCSS implemented in grades K1, kindergarten and first grade. 2013-2014, fully implemented in grades kindergarten through 2. 2014-2015 will be fully implemented K through 12. We are looking at about a year and a half. We don't have a whole lot of time. They're already holding Common Core State Standards summer institutes where they're teaching teachers and superintendents and administrators how to implement Common Core. And since the tests are in the process of being developed and no Common Core textbooks are out there yet, even though the math ones that they're using, they're not specifically Common Core, but they're there, but the specific Common Core textbooks aren't out there yet. So teachers are developing their own lessons to comply with Common Core right now. What can we do? Educate yourselves on Common Core. Educate others on Common Core. Get out there. Learn about it. Go do your research. Really figure out what's going on with this. Get involved. Reach out to other groups. We've got to get the Florida legislature to stop. We've got to get them to stop, at least until we can get them educated and everybody can figure out exactly what's going on with this. Allow the legislature, they don't turn over our state's rights to control education. We have got to stop this. There's no question about it. So, here's a line you can use. There's actually a couple of them. Common Core is education without representation. Parents have no say. Zero. You have lost all control over your kids' education, your grandkids, whatever. You've lost it. It's gone. Common Core goes into effect. You have no say as to what they're being taught, how they're being taught it, or what information is being collected on them. And also, Common Core is not about education. It's about control.